He'd moved to the desert to reinvent himself.
He wanted to get out.
His past life wouldn't follow him there.
He could leave everything behind and have a fresh start.
In the process, he found love.
I'm Shanice.
He's really attracted to her.
Nice to meet you.
She had a beautiful smile.
This was the person he could start his new life with.
But he would never get the chance.
The neighbors heard multiple gunshots.
The apartment's riddled with bullet holes.
She found him in a pool of blood.
Had his past finally caught up with him?
He had been going from that life for several years at that point.
There's no getting out.
Or was passion to blame?
When I heard that, I was astonished.
This is just shocking. It's heartbreaking.
He didn't deserve to die that way.
February 10th, 2006, 29 Palms, California. It's a cool and quiet morning in this desert oasis, an hour east of Los Angeles.
It's kind of secluded. There's not a lot of people there. The biggest attraction in the town would be the Joshua Tree National Park.
The town is also home to the Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center military base.
At 11 a.m., 21-year-old Shanice Bailey has just arrived at the home of her boyfriend, 28-year-old Lewis Kimball.
Lewis,
She hadn't been able to get a hold of him all morning and was starting to become concerned.
are you in there?
But outside Lewis's apartment, Shanice makes an alarming discovery.
The window was shattered.
Shanice uses her key to open the front door. But once inside, her worst fears are realized.
Oh my God, Louis!
She found him lying on the floor in a pool of blood.
It was the most horrifying way she could have found him. Louis!
Lewis was completely unresponsive, so Shanice immediately called 911.
Yes, I think my boyfriend is dead. Please send somebody now.
28-year-old Lewis Kimball never had it easy.
Lewis grew up in Westmont in South Central Los Angeles. It's a poverty-stricken area.
They call it Death Alley because there's so many murders in the area.
Lewis often found himself lacking stability growing up.
He moved a lot. He was really just bouncing around. There was times that he would live with an aunt. Maybe he would live with his mother.
But Lewis ended up finding his real home on the streets.
Lewis kind of fell into the gang culture and became, very, very involved in the gang life. He dropped out of school. He was on a pretty destructive path.
He felt as though no one cared about him. He didn't see the need to go to school.
It's almost like it's a rite of passage in that area. The youth, especially the male youth, looked up to these gang members because that's their family. The way things work in LA gangs is you have to put in work. So you have to hit a lick, you have to, do certain things to prove yourself.
Lewis racked up many drug offenses just to show them that he was really down.
You want that street credibility. It's like, it's just life. There's no getting out of the gang. Once you're in, you're in.
But to those who knew Lewis best, like his friend Candace Hicks, there was much more to him than his tough exterior.
He liked to give off the impression that he was tough. He had this sort of like bop when he walked, but he was really funny. He was a prankster, and he was a real sweetheart.
Lewis was also known for his intelligence.
A lot of people think that men or boys who are in gangs are idiots. They're dumb. They dropped out of school because they couldn't hack it. And he was very smart. Even though he was in this gang, I knew his true potential.
When Candace decided to go away to college, Lewis was inspired to make a change in his own life.
I got into college.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my God, Candace, that's what's up. Doing it.
I went to school for pre-med, and he was really happy about that. He was proud about that. I think that watching me do it watching me be the proverbial rose that grew from concrete, it inspired him, at least momentarily, to do something different.
You know, maybe one day I'll get out of here too, so.
Yes. Look, I believe in you. You've always been ambitious, so.
Thanks.
In 2003, Lewis left South Central Los Angeles and the gang life behind.
Lewis tried to turn his life around. He moved to 29 Palms.
Lewis was really looking forward to start his life over and, just start something new, something positive.
He enrolled into a continuation school in order to finish high school.
So he eventually decided to get his diploma and just really get away from the gang life.
For Lewis, the remote location was perfect because no one would ever find him there. He was hoping to leave his criminal past behind and get a new, fresh start at life.
Lewis was even able to make a fresh start at love.
After moving to 29 Palms, Lewis went on a few casual dates, but none of the relationships lasted.
Until he met 21-year-old Shanice Bailey after connecting with her online.
Lewis, nice to meet you.
She was beautiful, she had a beautiful smile. I mean, he just was really attracted to her, just drawn to her personality, and he was quickly taken by her.
You want something to drink?
Yeah, sure. Martini, please.
Martini for the lady.
They just had this immediate connection.
She was charming and down to earth.
So, do you ever miss LA?
Why? I got everything I need right here.
Before long, the two were inseparable.
And he thought this was the person he could start his new life with.
Instead, Shanice would be the person who found Lewis.
Lewis, are you in there?
In the most horrific condition.
She is not able to contact Lewis, so she decides to, pay him a visit. To her surprise, she finds her boyfriend.
Oh my God, Lewis!
In a pool of blood.
When first responders arrive, it's clear there's no hope for Lewis.
At this point, he was dead on the floor.
It's just as obvious that police have a homicide on their hands.
The cause of death was gunshot wounds.
The walls are riddled with bullet holes.
To detectives, it looks like a classic gang-related hit.
Former gang member Lewis Kemble had left his troubled life in South Central LA behind for a fresh start 140 miles away.
Lewis settled on 29 Palms, a small town in the desert.
Secluded, somewhere where he could just really start fresh.
After a few other failed relationships, Lewis had fallen in love with 21-year-old Shanice Bailey.
He saw a lot of potential in their relationship and thought that this could be a part of the puzzle to, starting a new life.
But had Lewis's old life finally caught up with him?
Oh my God, Lewis!
On February 10th, Shanice found Lewis dead inside his home.
Lewis was lying on the floor in a pool of blood.
Yes, 911!
As police begin processing the scene, it's clear Lewis's death was no accident.
The window was shattered, the wall was covered in bullet holes, and Lewis had been shot in the neck.
Investigators determined that Lewis must have died almost instantly.
The shot to his neck had penetrated his carotid artery, and he bled out.
Based on the level of rigor mortis, police surmised Lewis had been dead for around 24 hours. But why had he been killed? Looking around the home, detectives rule out robbery as a motive.
Investigators didn't find anything to be out of place.
Cash, electronics, and other items of value were undisturbed.
In fact, it didn't appear that Lewis's killer had even entered the home.
There were no signs of forced entry or of a struggle taking place inside.
All the shots appeared to be fired outside the home.
Found these shell casings in the parking lot.
An officer removed multiple .380 and .40 caliber shell casings from outside the home.
The shell casings reveal an alarming fact about the crime.
Finding these shell casings on the ground would, suggest that there were actually two shooters. And they just opened fire on Lewis without even stepping foot in the home.
You think it's gang-related?
Investigators wonder if Lewis's prior gang involvement may have come back to haunt him.
They knew from a preliminary search of his records that he was involving some gang activity before moving to 29 Palms.
To police, this looked like classic gang-related violence.
29 Palms has its own shady side.
Because it's in a desert area that's very sparsely populated, there's a lot of drug activity. There are drug labs and things like that.
Some of the drugs would wind up an hour away in Los Angeles, but a lot of them would circulate throughout the town.
Which meant 29 Palms wasn't entirely free of the same type of gangs Lewis left Los Angeles to escape.
Some of the businesses that cater to them, unfortunately, tend to produce a certain amount of property crime and other activities. If he was involved in criminal activity, there might be enemies as a result of criminal activity.
Back at the station, detectives begin looking over 911 call logs to try to determine what time the shooting took place.
From the looks of the crime scene, 7 shots have been fired on Lewis's home, so there is a good chance someone called in to report the noise.
Detectives are in luck.
San Bernardino 911 received several calls from Lewis neighborhood early that morning.
Several people had called law enforcement and reported that they'd heard multiple gunshots around 1 or 2 a.m. Deputies were dispatched, but they didn't find anything.
Investigators know those must have been the gunshots that killed Lewis Kimball, but who fired them was still a mystery.
While several neighbors had heard the shots and called 911, none of them had actually seen the shooters.
As investigators continue their search for answers, news of Lewis's death spreads.
One of my friends called me and she's like, "Hey, did you know Lewis passed away?"
What?
And I was like, "What? What happened?"
You can't be serious.
And that's when I found out that he was murdered.
Not Lewis.
And when I found out that he was murdered, I was devastated. Nothing inside of me could fathom why someone would kill him, especially when he had gotten away from the gang activity. It just didn't make sense to me.
Anyone who knew Lewis knew he had been out of that life for a while. It was part of the reason why he left Los Angeles in the first place.
But could someone from Los Angeles have followed Lewis to 29 Palms? Hoping for more information that could help lead to a motive, detectives decide to sit down with the woman who discovered Lewis's body, his girlfriend, Shanice Bailey.
Shanice was completely distraught when officers first arrived at the home and was taken away while they processed the scene.
Now that she's had some time to gather her thoughts, detectives circled back to her to get her official statement.
So, how long did you know Lewis?
About a year.
Did he ever tell you about his time in L.A.?
I know what you're thinking.
She told investigators there was no way that Lewis's death was gang-related.
But Lewis isn't into that lifestyle anymore.
She was adamant that he had been going from that life for years at that point.
That's what he told you.
It's true.
She knew that he was trying to make a better life for himself.
But when detectives asked Shanice if Lewis had made any enemies in 29 Palms, she has a ready answer.
According to Shanice, there was only one person who would have wanted to harm Lewis, his ex-girlfriend, Nicole Sullivan.
In 2006, Los Angeles police estimated the city's street gangs had approximately 40,000 members, and that gangs were responsible for almost 60% of Los Angeles homicides. In 95% of gang-related homicides, the victim was male. And while the median age of victims was 24, 30% of young men killed by gangs were still in their teens. February 10, 2006. In 29 Palms, California, detectives investigating Lewis Kimball's murder suspect his death is gang-related.
I know what you're thinking.
However, Lewis's girlfriend, Shanice Bailey, swears that isn't the case.
She didn't believe at all that this was gang-related. She knew that Lewis had left that life behind, and he was on the straight and narrow.
Instead, she suspected that an ex-girlfriend of Lewis's had something to do with the murder.
That ex-girlfriend is 21-year-old Nicole Sullivan.
Shanice said she didn't know all that much about Nicole.
But you've met her.
Just once.
When was that?
Wednesday night.
That would have been a few hours before detectives believed the murder occurred.
Shanice says that the night started out like any other.
They decided to go to the club that night in 29 Palms.
They were having a few drinks, just hanging out.
They wanted to have a good time.
Instead, they ran into Nicole.
Shanice told detectives that Nicole actually approached them at the club.
Hey, Louis. Who is she?
That's my girl, bro. What are you talking about?
Who the hell are you?
That led to a confrontation between the two women.
Look, you need to stay away from my man. Oh, it's a little too late for that.
Shanice and the ex-girlfriend had words. They start to push each other.
Get out of my face.
Whoa.
And it gets to the point where, a fight breaks out.
Chill. Let's chill.
Don't play with me.
Lewis has to actually step in.
In an effort to break up the altercation, Lewis pushed Nicole off of Shanice and onto the ground.
She pushes him back, and he pushes her harder. When he pushed her, she fell.
Oh, you done it now, Louis.
She got a cut to her head, and when that happened, she was really upset.
The argument had really escalated. At that point, club security had to intervene.
They were all thrown out the club.
But Shanice says that as they were being escorted out, it was clear that Nicole wasn't about to let things go.
You gonna pay for this, Louis? You gonna pay for this, Louis?
She's yelling that, I'm gonna have somebody get you.
Bye, Nicole.
A few hours later, Lewis was dead.
So you think this Nicole killed him?
Yeah.
But you weren't there.
No.
She doesn't go home with him, and he ends up going home alone.
Shanice says she tried calling Lewis in the morning, but he never answered.
It wasn't a big deal at first, but when I couldn't get him on the phone this morning, I started thinking about what Nicole said.
She was worried about what may have happened, so she came over to the house.
She finds him dead on the floor in a pool of his blood.
Oh my God, Louis!
After wrapping up their conversation with Shanice, detectives make speaking to Nicole Sullivan their top priority.
She's a possible person of interest that detectives need to look into.
Based on Shanice's story, it sounded as though Nicole had actually threatened Lewis just hours before he'd been shot.
Was she upset enough to kill Lewis in cold-blooded murder?
When detectives sit down with Nicole, she seems distraught over the news of Lewis's death.
I can't believe it. I just saw him.
When was that?
Wednesday night at the club. He was with this girl.
Nicole admitted that she had been in a fight with Shanice at the club, but she also said she didn't start the fight.
That girl, Shanice, she attacked me.
Why would she do that?
Nicole told police that she and Lewis were actually in the process of getting back together.
But he was with Shanice then?
Yeah, so.
But didn't that make you mad?
A little.
She said she was only upset because he was in public with another woman.
She denied having anything to do with Lewis's murder.
Detectives are now wondering if Shanice had a motive for murder that night.
She didn't know me and Lewis planned on getting back together.
Until the run-in at the club.
Look, you need to stay away from my man.
Oh, it's a little too late for that.
What's she talking about? What's she talking about, Louis?
At this point in the investigation, detectives don't know who to believe.
Lewis Kimball was quite the ladies' man. He had two women fighting over him.
But did one of the women go so far as to kill him?
Did you go to Lewis's apartment that night?
No.
Unsure who to believe, detectives pay a visit to the club where Nicole and Shanice had their showdown.
Investigators want to get a more objective viewpoint of what happened the night Lewis died.
The staff at the club corroborated that Shanice and Nicole were fighting over Lewis.
Yeah, they seem to be fighting over a guy, causing a ruckus, so I escorted him out.
The bouncer said after he'd kicked them out, Nicole left with the people that she'd been hanging out with that night.
However, the bouncer also adds a surprising new detail.
As the group was being kicked out of the club, Shanice and Lewis got into a fight.
Get about it. Come on, let's go.
I'm not your baby.
Shanice!
To detectives, this explains why Lewis went home alone that night. But does it also point to his killer?
Investigators became immediately suspicious because Shanice had left that out of her story.
In February 2006, detectives in 29 Palms, California now suspect it was a tangled love affair, not gang violence, that led to Lewis Kimball's murder.
The night he died, there had been a fight at the club involving his current girlfriend, Shanice Bailey, and his ex-girlfriend, Nicole Sullivan.
What's she talking about, Lewis?
I don't know what she's talking about.
Oh! That girl Shanice, she attacked me.
Why would she do that?
I know what you're thinking.
Both women are trying to shift the blame.
All right, man, thank you very much. That's all we need, okay?
Police investigating the murder caught themselves in the middle of a love triangle with everyone pointing the finger.
According to bouncers at the club, Shanice had even gotten into an argument with Lewis after they broke up the fight with Nicole.
Shanice had left that out of her story.
I'm not your baby.
Shanice!
Shanice and Nicole each seemed to have a motive to harm Lewis.
Maybe the women had teamed up. If Lewis was two-timing both of them, there were two different types of shell casings found at the scene.
It's 380 and 40 caliber.
Which indicated there were two different shooters.
However, detectives still don't have solid proof that either one of the shooters is Shanice or Nicole.
There was no forensic evidence at the scene that would link to either woman, or anyone else for that matter.
There were no prints on the shell casings found at the scene.
No one had actually seen the shooters.
Looking for new leads, detectives make an appeal in the local news media, asking the public for information.
As a result, they hear from a local man who's actually a taxi driver in the area.
He happened to be near Lewis's apartment building the night of the shooting.
The cab driver says he didn't witness the murder, but he believes he did see the shooters.
He had been driving along his way to pick up a customer when he heard several loud bangs.
He claimed he saw two men running from the apartment complex after hearing shots fired.
This new revelation throws investigators for a loop.
If there were two men involved, then that would immediately eliminate Shanice and Nicole as the shooters.
But it does confirm for detectives that there were, in fact, two shooters.
Who those shooters are remains a mystery.
Unfortunately, the taxi driver can't give detectives any identifying details about who the shooters are.
The cab driver's story didn't entirely exonerate Nicole and Shanice either.
Even if the women didn't pull the trigger, it doesn't mean that one of them wasn't the mastermind behind the whole thing.
What you want to do?
Detectives decide to switch gears and contact the friends who had been at the club with Nicole on the night of the altercation. Perhaps they knew more about what happened afterwards.
Those were people that the detectives would definitely want to speak to.
Have a seat right here, please.
Detectives learned that Nicole had been out with Sister Sierra and Shayla Walker, so they bring them in for an interview.
Sierra and Shayla were adamant that they did nothing wrong.
We barely even know Lewis, okay?
But they also revealed that Nicole had lied to detectives.
Did you go home after you got kicked out of the club?
Well, no.
They had not gone straight home after they left the club, like she said.
After being thrown out of the club, they ran into a couple of friends in the parking lot.
Hey, y'all, what's going on?
Those friends are 24-year-old Antoine Williams and 19-year-old Bryson Hall.
This place sucks tonight. Y'all want to go somewhere else?
Yeah, we can go back to my place.
That's cool. Y'all want to do that?
According to Sierra and Shayla, Bryson drove the group over to his house to hang out after they had run into each other.
At Bryson's, Shayla and Sierra saw Nicole discussing something with the two men.
They didn't know what was being discussed until Nicole said it was time to go over to Lewis's place.
Hey, y'all, we're gonna go over to Lewis's place. I kind of want to have a word with him after what happened earlier.
Sierra and Shayla felt a little uneasy about going over there after the altercation in the club, but they wanted to support their friend.
So you all went over there?
Yes.
The Walker sisters have just put Nicole at the scene of the crime.
The girls insist that Nicole only wanted to talk to Lewis.
They said, honestly, she loved Lewis. She just didn't want him to be mad at her.
Once the group arrived at the complex, Sierra and Shayla say they waited in the car, while Nicole and the guys approached Lewis's apartment.
We'll be right back.
They did think it was odd that Antoine and Bryson were going in with Nicole, but they sort of brushed the red flag aside.
According to the sisters, chaos soon erupted.
The sisters said they heard several gunshots and saw Nicole running back towards the car.
Girl, what was that?
Nothing. We gotta get out of here.
Seconds later, Antoine and Bryson followed suit, and the group sped off into the night.
Sierra and Shayla said they were dropped off at home after that, and they didn't ask any more questions.
They were afraid about what could happen to them if they asked anything else about what had taken place.
Still, the sister's story fits with what detectives already know.
There were two different caliber of shell casings at the scene.
The taxi driver saw two males fleeing the scene.
But if the Walker sisters' account is true, Nicole could have been one of the shooters.
The sisters remember Bryson, Antoine, and Nicole approaching the home before shots were fired.
That means any combination of the three could have been responsible for firing the shots that killed Lewis.
You're free to go.
Detectives knew they needed to get these three into custody ASAP to get to the bottom of what happened that night.
In 29 Palms, California, detectives investigating the homicide case of 28-year-old Lewis Kimball have just learned that one of their suspects, Lewis's ex-girlfriend, Nicole Sullivan, wasn't entirely truthful during their initial interview with her.
Nicole's friends Sierra and Shayla Walker said they had gone with her to Lewis's place the night of the shooting with Antoine Williams and Bryson Hall.
We'll be right back.
Sierra and Shayla recall shots being fired, but they didn't actually see who fired the shots.
Police immediately put out an APB for Antoine Williams and Bryson Hall. In the meantime, they bring Nicole back in for another round of questioning.
What is this about? I already told y'all everything I know.
She continues to deny having any involvement in Lewis's death.
I didn't have anything to do with what happened to Lewis.
But when detectives confront Nicole with what the Walker sisters told them, she begins to break down.
When she realized that she had been caught in a lie, her demeanor completely changed.
I didn't mean for this to happen.
Nicole admits that the group went over to Lewis's place that night and echoes the Walker sisters' claim that she'd only intended to talk to her ex.
We'll be right back.
But according to Nicole, Antoine and Bryson had other plans.
She said the men rushed ahead of her towards the apartment, and everything happened fast after that.
As she followed them, the men just opened fire on the home.
Nicole said that as soon as the men started firing, she took off back toward the car.
It was all Antoine and Bryson. I had nothing to do with it.
She said after hearing about what happened at the club, The guys must have taken it upon themselves to punish Lewis.
She maintains that, her intentions were only to talk things out with Lewis. She had no ill will as far as violence towards him.
But under California law, all 3 individuals could be held responsible for this tragedy.
When detectives finished interviewing Nicole, they put her under arrest for the murder of Lewis Kimball.
Stand up, please, ma'am.
I had nothing to do with his murder. It was Antoine and Bryson. It wasn't me.
Hands behind your back, please.
The theory was that she was an aider and abetter of that crime.
I only wanted to talk to him.
Detectives aren't convinced that her intentions are as pure as she's leading on.
This way, please.
In the eyes of law enforcement, there was no reason for Antoine and Bryson to kill Lewis unless Nicole put them up to it.
The next morning, police are able to bring Bryson Hall into custody. But he isn't much help in unraveling the mystery of who really orchestrated this crime.
He didn't want to talk to detectives about what happened that night and lawyered up.
He also didn't give information on the whereabouts of Williams.
And tracking down Antoine will be easier said than done.
Days go by, and police are starting to think, maybe somebody tipped them off.
They're not sure that they're going to be able to bring him to justice because he's on the run.
But on February 18th, detectives receive a promising tip.
Homicide.
A woman called in and said she was currently in Vegas with Antoine.
She had seen on the news that he was a wanted man and knew she had to say something.
She agrees to tell police, where they can find him.
Once the tipster gives them Antoine's location, detectives arrange for Las Vegas police and federal marshals to take him into custody.
9 days after the murder of Lewis Kimball, police arrest him.
But just like his pal Bryson Hall, Antoine isn't willing to say much.
He also lawyered up right away.
On May 15th, 2007, the murder trial against Nicole Sullivan, Bryson Hall, and Antoine Williams begins inside a San Bernardino courtroom.
All 3 defendants were tried together.
But the outcome will shock even the most seasoned attorneys.
She recants a whole story.
You could have knocked me over with a feather duster when I heard that.
What I'd like everybody to know about Lewis was that he had a really, really big heart. And I think maybe there just wasn't enough people to bring that out of him, which is why a lot of people didn't see that side. So I just want everybody to know, just don't count someone out because they've had a horrible past or a criminal past. Because at the end of the day, there's still someone inside. And that someone is often a really, really good person.
On May 15th, 2007, the joint trial against Nicole Sullivan, Bryson Hall, and Antoine Williams for the murder of 28-year-old Lewis Kimball has gotten underway. Unfortunately, none of Lewis's loved ones are able to be there.
No one showed up on Lewis's behalf, like no family or, anything like that. I attempted to attend the trial, but I wasn't able to go because I had to work. 29 Palms is 2 hours away from Los Angeles. It's a long way to drive for a lot of people.
In their opening statement, prosecutors assert Nicole Sullivan's jealousy and rage against Lewis Kimball fueled Bryson and Antoine's actions.
The prosecution theorized that Bryson and Antoine were the ones who fired the shots, but that they did it at Nicole's behest.
There was much testimony about the dispute that boiled over at the nightclub immediately before the shooting took place.
Hey, Lewis. Who is she?
The prosecution argued that when Nicole saw Lewis in the club with Shanice,
Get out of my face.
she just became enraged.
She was mortified and embarrassed.
Oh, you've done it now, Lewis.
She felt like, she had been assaulted.
You gonna pay for this, Lewis? You gonna pay
According to the prosecution, as soon as Nicole ran into Bryson and Antoine outside the club, she began plotting her revenge.
Prosecution maintains that they knew exactly what they were going to do when they headed to Lewis's apartment. Why else would they go to the house at 2 o'clock in the morning, armed?
Prosecutors weren't sure which man fired the .40 caliber and which fired the .380.
One of the bullet strikes that struck Mr. Kimball severed one of his carotid arteries, which would have had him bleed to death within minutes.
And by the time of the trial, 2 other witnesses have come forward who claim that Bryson Hall has talked about the crime.
His girlfriend and his aunt told the courtroom that Bryson had been bragging about shooting up Lewis's place.
But will jurors hear from the other person who identified Bryson and Antoine as the shooters? Nicole Sullivan.
She was interviewed by the police prior to my representation of her, and she gave a rather detailed statement to them, which basically placed the blame for the crime on the 2 male individuals.
It was all Antoine and Bryson. I had nothing to do with it.
However, the fact that Nicole was being tried with Bryson and Antoine complicated things.
The tape was inadmissible in court because at the time, she was the co-defendant.
As long as she was a co-defendant, it's simply inadmissible hearsay.
Which puts the prosecutor in a bit of a bind.
He needed the statement from her to identify the 2 shooters. He couldn't get it while she was a co-defendant with them. And that's when he came to me.
The prosecution needs Nicole to agree to take the stand and testify against the 2 men. So in the middle of the murder trial, they decide to offer her a deal.
She'd be allowed to plead guilty to felony assault with a firearm.
In exchange for her testimony, she only had to serve 3 years probation.
She would be released that day, provided she testified.
With the risk of life in prison hanging over her head, Nicole takes the deal.
Okay, I'll do it.
There was really no practical choice in the matter. My client was charged with murder, and that was just too big a gamble to take.
But are the prosecutors taking an even bigger gamble on Nicole? When their new star witness takes the stand, nothing goes as they intended.
She takes a stand, she shocks everyone.
She recants a whole story identifying Bryson and Antoine as the shooters.
She claimed she had no memory of making any such statement.
The prosecutor is just disgusted by her actions. He described her demeanor on the stand as just despicable.
However, Nicole's sudden reversal doesn't completely derail the case.
At that point, under the rules of evidence, the prior statement that she made became admissible in evidence. So that gave the prosecution the opportunity to play that recorded statement in the case against the 2 remaining defendants, and that's what they did.
They basically impeached her with her prior inconsistent statement.
But will that be enough to secure Bryson and Antoine's convictions?
Attorneys for Bryson and Antoine argued there was no proof they were the shooters. They claimed it could have just as easily been Nicole Sullivan.
On June 11, 2007, after 3 long days of deliberation, the jury returns with a verdict.
The jury found both Bryson Hall and Antoine Williams not guilty of first-degree murder.
You could have knocked me over with a feather duster when I heard that. I was astonished that they were acquitted.
According to the jury, due to the lack of evidence and the conflicting witness account, there just wasn't enough for them to convict.
The only person who ends up behind bars is Nicole Sullivan.
Recanting her story on the stand broke the terms of her plea deal.
Since she violated the plea agreement, the prosecutors rescinded the offer of parole.
Although Nicole isn't found guilty of murder, she is found guilty of felony assault with a firearm.
Accounting for time served, she spends less than 2 years in prison.
For Lewis Kimball's loved ones, the outcome of the court proceedings just makes his death an even harder pill to swallow.
The fact that no one was convicted of murder itself made it feel like Lewis would never get justice for what happened to him.
for anyone to go shooting into someone else's house. Anyone who does that should absolutely be behind bars, because you have given us reason to believe that you don't value human life. He didn't deserve to die that way.
Lewis Kimball was a young man who tried admirably to turn his life around, only to have it stolen from him.
It's just really sad that, Lewis was on the right track, and after struggle, just was never able to get to the top of that mountain. And for it to end like this, it's just heartbreaking.
Once the verdict came down, what came to mind was something that he said as a young kid, which was, "I'm gonna die by the time I'm 21." In a later conversation, and he was older than 21, he said he didn't think he was gonna live to see 30. And he died just before he turned 29. So that resonated with my heart.
It resonated so much that Candace did something to ensure that while he may be gone, Lewis Kimball will never be forgotten.
I said, you know what? I'm gonna take his last name. And in August of 2007, I changed my name to Candace Kimball, so that he knows that somebody did care, because I would carry it for the rest of my life.
Brittany described JR as a 32-year-old African-American male. Crucially, she mentioned an identifying mark, a rose tattooed on his inner right forearm. As Maurice stood by the river, he wondered if the body before him was indeed the missing father. This would be a milestone for Maurice. While he was experienced in property crimes, this would be his very first homicide investigation if the findings held true. The body was sent for an autopsy, an experience that remains etched in the memory of every detective. For Maurice, it was a nerve-wracking and gruesome introduction to the darker side of his profession. The victim had been bound hand and foot, a sight that Maurice described as the most uncivilized way for a person to leave this world. The medical examiner explained that while the level of decomposition made it difficult to determine the exact cause of death, the presence of the bindings made the ruling of homicide undeniable. There were lacerations to the belly, but they were not deep enough to cause exsanguination or internal damage. The presence of animals in the water made the interpretation of these injuries even more difficult. The medical examiner suggested that blunt force trauma from a beating might have been involved, but he could not say for certain. In a water recovery case, DNA and fingerprints are rarely recovered. The findings of the autopsy were relatively limited, with one major exception that provided the breakthrough the investigators needed. The presence of a rose tattoo on the right arm confirmed that the body was indeed Leon Harrison Jr. The case was officially retitled from a missing person investigation to a homicide. Maurice felt the weight of the responsibility. In the world of homicide investigation, there is an expression that you go from being a new guy to an old guy in about 30 minutes. He began by diving into the life of the victim. Brittany Green provided a portrait of a man who was funny, outgoing, and possessed a big personality. He was a loving and caring father who would run down the sidelines of a football field, cheering for his son's first touchdown. The bond between JR and his children was the cornerstone of his life. The investigation then turned to JR's personal life. Brittany mentioned that he had an estranged wife named Tasha. They had been married since September of 2015, but the relationship had soured. JR had moved out, complaining of unhappiness and constant friction. This introduced a classic motive: marital trouble. Maurice found it difficult to locate Tash initially, so he pivoted to JR's phone records. The records revealed that on the evening of February 25th, JR had received 2 phone calls from a man named Samuel Pillman. Pillman became a person of interest, potentially the last person to see JR alive. When Maurice attempted to contact him at his place of residence, the Quality Inn, Pillman hung up the phone upon hearing the investigator's name. This behavior immediately raised an eyebrow. In the mind of a detective, hanging up on the police is a sure way to ensure an in-person meeting. Maurice called back with a different approach, explaining that he was investigating a death. Pillman finally agreed to talk. He admitted that he had reached out to JR to purchase some marijuana for a birthday. CELEBRATR had a small side hustle selling grass, a detail that Maurice viewed with professional neutrality. To Maurice, it did not matter if the victim was a drug dealer or a saint. He was a human being who had been murdered, and he deserved justice. Pillman explained that during the first call, JR agreed to meet at the hotel. However, JR never showed up. A second call went unanswered. The phone record supported Pillman's story, showing a short duration for the second call, consistent with an unanswered ring. Pillman was dropped as a suspect, leaving Maurice back at square one, 2 weeks behind the trail. The investigator finally located Tai Shra at a steel mill where she worked as a security guard. It was the same place where JR had also been employed. When they broke the news of his death, she agreed to come to the police department for an interview. Initially, she painted a picture of a good marriage that had eventually turned cold. She mentioned that money was a constant issue, which had forced them to move in with her father and brother. She claimed that both she and JR had been unfaithful. Tayish stated that the last time she saw JR was on February 25th, around 10 o'clock in the evening, when he came by to pick up some clothes. She claimed he was on the phone with another woman named Rosario, and they were having an incredibly heated argument. Tayish described Rosario as a maniacal, jealous woman who was out of control. This directed the investigation's spotlight onto Rosario. When Rosario learned of JR's death, she came forward voluntarily. She spoke of her deep love for him and explained that she had not reported him missing because she did not want to interfere in his complicated domestic situation. She provided a completely different perspective on the marriage, claiming that Tayish was the one who had been repeatedly unfaithful, and that JR was constantly trying to fix the relationship. The investigators confronted Rosario about the alleged angry phone call on the night of the 25th. Rosario denied ever having an angry conversation with JR. Instead, she claimed that Tayish had called her from JR's phone, ranting, raving, and screaming threats. Rosario handed over her phone, and the text history and call logs confirmed her version of events. She was not the aggressor. She was a woman mourning the loss of a man she loved. The investigation shifted back to Tayish and her family. Rosario had mentioned that JR did not get along with Taysh's brother, Alex Ross Jr., or her father, Alex Ross Sr. The brother reportedly acted as Taysh's bodyguard, and both men harbored a deep animosity toward JR, viewing him as a bad influence. Maurice was now navigating a complex web of lies and family loyalty. The only physical evidence they had was the speaker wire. Maurice, showing the tenacity of a seasoned detective, began scouring local stores like Walmart to find a match. He struck out at the retail level, but then a bell went off in his brain. Alex Ross Jr. worked at a garage where he installed car audio systems. He worked with speaker wire every single day, although the wire at the garage did not provide a direct match to the bindings. The circumstantial connection was growing stronger. The investigators realized they needed to find the crime scene. They suspected that something terrible had happened inside the Ra household on Highmarket Street. With enough circumstantial evidence, they secured a search warrant. As they processed the house, they entered Tayshia's bedroom and noticed something odd about the wall-to-wall carpeting. Pieces of the carpet had been cut out and replaced at strange angles. When they pulled up the replacement pieces and the padding beneath, they found a massive stain on the side. A presumptive test confirmed it was blood. It was not just a small spot. The wood was saturated. High-velocity blood spatter was also found on the walls, indicating a violent beating. Forensic testing later confirmed that the blood belonged to Leon Harrison Jr. JR had met his end in that very room. Maurice brought Tayish in for another interview. He showed her the photographs of the blood-soaked substance. Her excuse was as transparent as it was desperate. She claimed it was a nosebleed. Maurice, with a touch of dry wit, remarked that one would need a fire hose up their nose to produce that much blood. Tayish maintained her innocence, claiming she would never hurt her husband, but the evidence told a different story. One person could not have easily bound, killed, and transported a man of JR's size. This was a family affair. The breakthrough came when a man named Andrew Johnson came forward. He reported that Alex Ross Jr. had asked for a ride to Myrtle Beach shortly after JR went missing. GPS data from Alex Jr.'s phone confirmed the trip. More importantly, the phone data showed that at 2 o'clock in the morning on February 26th, Alex Jr. had gone to a local Walmart. The surveillance footage from the store provided the ultimate nail in the coffin. It showed Alex Ross Jr. and his father, Alex Sr., purchasing hydrogen peroxide, a well-known cleaning agent for removing blood. There they were, in the middle of the night, buying supplies to clean up a murder scene in their own home. It was a moment of pure euphoria for the investigators. The full picture finally emerged. Taish had lured JR to the house with the promise of a candlelight dinner in the bathtub, a cruel trap designed to exploit his hope for reconciliation. When he entered the bedroom, he was ambushed by Taish and her brother. He was beaten, bound with speaker wire, and eventually killed. The family then worked together to clean the scene and dump his body in the Black River, hoping the current would carry their secret to the Atlantic Ocean. In court, the jury saw through the lies. The father was convicted of obstruction of justice for his role in the cleanup and sentenced to 8 years. Taish and her brother, Alex Jr., were convicted of murder and each sentenced to 37 years in prison. For the family of Leon Harrison Jr., the verdict brought tears of relief and a sense of justice. JR is remembered not for the way he died, but for the way he lived as a devoted father and a joyful soul. His children continued to honor his memory, releasing balloons at the river and celebrating his life. For investigator Alan Morris, his first homicide case was a baptism by fire. It was a testament to the fact that good police work is the necessary answer to the human condition. It cannot prevent the darkness, but it ensures that those who choose to walk in it will eventually face the consequences. In the end, justice was not just a word. It was the result of a rare breed of people who refused to let the dead be forgotten. It was a Saturday morning, the 11th of March in the year 2017, in the quiet town of Georgetown, South Carolina. The air carried the scent of the low country, a mix of salt marsh and ancient cypress trees. A local resident was engaging in a quiet hobby, plying his fishing line on the dark, tea-colored waters of the Black River. This river, like many in the South, holds secrets beneath its ripples. But on this particular morning, the secret refused to stay submerged. The fisherman noticed something drifting in the water that did not belong to the natural landscape. As he drew closer, his heart hammered against his ribs. What he saw was not debris or a fallen log, but a human body floating in the current. To be an American detective is to answer a call that most people would prefer to ignore. It takes a rare breed to solve the unsolvable, to look into the abyss of a ruthless killer and find the light of justice for the dead. Investigator Alan Morris was one such man. In Georgetown, they called them investigators rather than detectives, perhaps because they are generalists, working everything from fraud and burglaries to bank robberies. A normal day in this profession is a fragile concept that can turn into a nightmare in a matter of seconds. For Maurice, this was about to become the most significant case of his life. When the call came in at approximately 1:30 that afternoon, the sheriff office responded immediately. By the time investigator Maurice arrived at the riverbank, law enforcement officers were already in the arduous process of bringing the remains to the shore. They had to physically grasp the individual by the clothing, easing him onto the land with a grim sort of care. At first, there was the lingering hope that this was an accident, perhaps someone who had fallen from a boat or slipped into the treacherous currents. However, as the body was brought fully to light, that hope vanished. The victim's wrists and ankles were tightly bound with speaker wire. To a trained eye like Maurice, this was the unmistakable signature of a homicide. Water is a cruel element for a crime scene. It complicates the investigation by accelerating decomposition and washing away the delicate trace evidence detectives rely on. In the humid heat of South Carolina, even in February and March, the elements are unforgiving. The victim's face was unrecognizable, a blank slate where a human identity once resided. Positive identification was impossible at the scene, but Maurice already had a name floating in the back of his mind. He recalled a missing person report, filed by a woman named Brittany Green. Brittany had reported the disappearance of Leon Harrison Jr., a 32-year-old man known to everyone as JR. He was the father of her 2 children, and though they no longer lived together, he was a constant presence in their lives. He called every single night to speak to his children, a ritual that had been broken for 2 weeks. People with families and loved ones do not simply vanish off the face of the earth without a trace. Brittany described him as an African-American male with a distinctive tattoo, a rose on his inner right forearm. For investigator Maurice, this was a milestone. He generally handled property crimes, and if this was indeed a murder, it would be his very first homicide investigation. The body was sent for an autopsy, a process that is often a shock to the system for those uninitiated. Seeing a human being bound hand and foot, discarded like refuse, is an uncivilized sight that stays with a person. The medical examiner could not determine the exact cause of death, due to the advanced state of decomposition and the activity of aquatic life in the river. However, the presence of the speaker wire bindings allowed the examiner to officially rule the death a homicide. There were lacerations on the belly, but they were not deep enough to cause a fatal loss of blood. There was a possibility of blunt force trauma, but the water had taken the evidence of that as well. The one thing the water could not take was the rose tattoo on the right arm. It was the definitive proof Maurice needed. The missing person file was closed, and a homicide file was opened for Leon Harrison Jr. In the world of investigation, you go from being a newcomer to an old hand in 30 minutes when you are staring at a murder case. Maurice was nervous, but he was focused. He began by diving into the life of the man they called JR. Brittany Green spoke of JR with a warmth that painted a picture of a vibrant, funny, and outgoing personality. He was a man who loved to smile and tell jokes, but most importantly, he was a devoted father. His children remembered him as joyful and active. His son recalled a day on the football field where JR ran down the sidelines, cheering wildly as his son scored his first touchdown. He was a man deeply connected to his family. But every life has its complexities. When Maurice asked about enemies or conflicts, Brittany pointed toward JR's estranged wife, a woman named Taish Rue. JR and Taish had married in September of 2015, but the relationship had soured. JR had moved out, unhappy and seeking a different path. This bit of information was a classic starting point for any detective. A troubled marriage often provides the most direct motive. However, Taish was not easy to find initially. Maurice turned his attention to JR phone records to reconstruct his final movements. On the evening of February 25th, JR had received 2 phone calls from a man named Samuel Pillman. In the search for the last person to see the victim alive, Pillman became a person of interest. When Maurice finally reached Pillman on the phone, the man hung up as soon as the investigator identified himself. This behavior is a red flag in any investigation. Hanging up on a detective is a quick way to ensure you will be seeing that detective in person. When Maurice called back, he adopted a more direct approach, explaining that he was investigating a death. Pillman eventually admitted that he had called JR to purchase marijuana. They were supposed to meet at the Quality Inn where Pillman was staying to celebrate a birthday. JR had a side hustle selling grass, a detail that Maurice noted but did not let cloud his judgment. A victim history does not diminish the gravity of their murder. Pillman claimed that during the first call, JR agreed to come by the room, but he never showed up. The second call went unanswered. The phone records verified Pillman's story. The second call lasted only 15 to 20 seconds, indicating it likely went to voicemail or was never picked up. Samuel Pillman was cleared. The investigation led Maurice back to the hunt for Taish Rue. He finally located her at a steel mill where she worked as a security guard. It was a place where JR had also worked. When the news of her husband's death was broken to her, Taish was brought to the police department for questioning. She initially painted a picture of a decent marriage, but the cracks soon appeared. Money had been a constant source of friction, forcing them to move in with her father and brother. Both JR and Taish had issues with infidelity. Taish claimed she had kicked JR out after discovering his cheating, though they had an on and off relationship in the months that followed. Taish told Maurice that she last saw JR on February 25th around 10 o'clock in the evening. He had come by to pick up some clothes. She claimed he was on the phone with another woman named Rosario, and they were having a heated, jealous argument. Taish described Rosario as a maniacal, crazy woman who was dangerous. In the psychological chess game of an interview, this was a clear attempt to shift the spotlight of suspicion. If Rosario was the jealous one, then Rosario must be the killer. But a good detective knows that there are always 2 sides to a story, and often a third side that is the truth. When Rosario heard that the police were looking for her, she came forward voluntarily. She spoke of a deep love for JR and expressed her heartbreak over his death. She explained that JR was trying to move on from his marriage, but that Taish would not let go. When Maurice asked about the angry phone call on the night of the 25th, Rosario's story was completely different. Rosario claimed she never had a heated argument with JR that night. Instead, she said that while JR was at the Rue household, his phone called her. When she answered, it was not JR on the line, but Taish. Taish was ranting, caving, and screaming threats at her, calling her the other woman. Rosario handed her phone over to the detectives, and the text history and call logs confirmed her version of events perfectly. The jealousy and rage were not coming from the girlfriend, they were coming from the wife. This shift in the psychological profile of the suspects changed everything. Maurice now looked at Taish Rue not as a grieving widow, but as a woman scorned and filled with a dangerous level of resentment. Rosario also provided another piece of the puzzle. JR did not get along with Taish's brother, Alex Rue Jr., or her father, Alex Rue Sr. The brother saw himself as his sister protector, a self-appointed bodyguard, who harbored a deep hatred for JR. Maurice was now looking at a potential family conspiracy, but he lacked physical evidence. The only physical link he had was the speaker wire used to bind JR. He spent time at local retailers like Walmart, trying to match the wire, but came up empty. Then, a thought occurred to him. Alex Rue Jr. worked at a garage where he installed car stereo. This was a profession that required the daily use of speaker wire. Maurice visited the garage. While the manager could not provide an exact match for the wire used on the victim, the connection was too coincidental to ignore. However, without a crime scene, the case was stalled. JR was found in the river, but where was he killed? The most likely location was the place he was last seen, the Rue residence on High Market Street. Armed with a search warrant, Morris and his team descended on the house. Taish, her brother, and her father were forced to wait outside, while the investigators meticulously processed every room. In Taish's bedroom, they noticed something odd about the wall-to-wall carpeting. There were sections that had been cut and replaced at strange angles. When they pulled up the carpet and the padding, they found a massive stain on the subfloor. A presumptive test confirmed it was blood. The amount of blood was staggering. It had soaked through the carpet, the padding, and deep into the wood of the floor. There were also signs of high-velocity blood spatter on the walls, the kind of pattern that results from blunt force trauma or a violent beating. This was the crime scene. JR had met his end in that bedroom. When the lab results came back, the blood was a perfect match for Leon Harrison Jr. Maurice brought Taish back in for questioning. He showed her the photographs of the blood-soaked floor. Her response was a desperate lie. She claimed it was just a nosebleed. Maurice countered that a human being would need a fire hose up their nose to produce that much blood. She insisted she loved her husband and would never hurt him. But when the pressure mounted, she invoked her right to a lawyer and was allowed to leave. At that moment, Maurice knew he had the killers, but he needed more to secure a conviction. He needed a witness. That witness appeared in the form of a man named Andrew Johnson. He came forward to tell the police about a conversation he had with Alex Rue Jr. A few weeks after JR went missing, Alex had asked Andrew to help him move some furniture to Myrtle Beach. During that time, Alex had allegedly laughed and made comments about JR's disappearance. To confirm this, Maurice turned back to technology. A GPS location check on Alex Jr.'s cell phone showed that the trip to Myrtle Beach had indeed occurred. Even more damning was the discovery that at 2 o'clock in the morning on February 26, the night JR was murdered, Alex Jr.'s cell phone was at a local Walmart. Investigators spent hours poring over surveillance footage from that night. They found Alex Rue Jr. and his father, Alex Rue Sr., on camera. They were not buying groceries or household goods. They were buying hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide is a well-known cleaning agent used to remove blood. The image of the father and son standing in a Walmart in the middle of the night, purchasing supplies to clean up a murder scene in their own home, was the final nail in the coffin. The theory of the crime became clear. Taish had lured JR to the house with the promise of a reconciliation. She had sent him text messages about a candlelight dinner and a bath, a honey trap designed to lower his guard. When JR entered that bedroom, he wasn't met with love, but with an ambush. He was attacked, subdued, and bound with speaker wire by the siblings. The rage that had been building in Taish and the protective anger in her brother exploded into a fatal beating. Afterward, the father joined them in the cleanup and the disposal of the body. They took JR to the Black River and threw him in, hoping the current would carry their secret into the depths of the Atlantic Ocean. In the end, justice was served. The jury saw through the lies. The father was convicted of obstruction of justice and sentenced to 8 years in prison. Taish Rue and Alex Rue Jr. were convicted of murder and each sentenced to 37 years behind bars. For the children of Leon Harrison Jr., the pain of losing their father is a wound that may never fully heal. But they find solace in the fact that those responsible are facing the consequences of their actions. Every year, they release balloons at the river, a beautiful tribute to a man who was more than just a victim. He was a father, a son, and a friend. Investigator Alan Morris closed his first homicide case with a conviction, a testament to the power of meticulous police work and the refusal to let a victim be forgotten. The shadows of Georgetown were pushed back by the light of the truth, proving that no matter how deep the water or how dark the night, the consequences of evil will always find their way to the shore. It was a humid Saturday morning on March 11th. The air hung heavy with the scent of the marsh and the slow, rhythmic movement of the Black River. A local resident, seeking the quiet solace of his weekend hobby, was fishing along the riverbank. The river usually offered peace, but on this particular morning, it held a grim secret. The fisherman noticed something caught in the gentle current, something that did not belong among the cypress knees and murky water. As he pulled his boat closer, the reality of the situation became terrifyingly clear. It was a human body, floating face down, claimed by the river, but refused by its depths. This discovery marked the beginning of a journey into the darkest corners of human emotion. I have spent a long career closing murder cases, witnessing the aftermath of violence, but I am never the only one who answers the call. It takes a rare breed of individual to solve the unsolved, to catch a ruthless killer who believes they have outsmarted the world, and to ultimately find justice for those who can no longer speak for themselves. That is what it truly takes to be an American detective. In Georgetown, the title used is investigator rather than detective. Investigator Alan Morris was the man assigned to the call. A general investigator by trade, Maurice was used to a wide variety of cases, from the tedious paperwork of fraud to the high adrenaline of bank robberies. In a small county, an investigator must be a jack of all trades. You might start your day expecting a normal routine, but in this profession, a normal day can turn into a life-changing event in a matter of seconds. For Alan Morris, this job was not just a career, it was life itself. The body was discovered within the county jurisdiction, prompting a full response from the sheriff's office. By 1:30 in the afternoon, law enforcement had arrived at the scene. The process of recovery was delicate and somber. Officers had to physically reach into the water, grasping the individual by his clothing to ease him back to the shore. At first, there was the lingering hope that this was a tragic accident, perhaps a fisherman who had fallen overboard or a boater lost to the current. However, as the body reached dry land, those hopes evaporated. The victim's wrists and ankles were tightly bound with speaker wire. To any experienced eye, this was not an accident. It was a clear, calculated indication of homicide. When a victim is found in the water, the complexity of the case increases exponentially. Water is a cruel medium for forensic evidence. It washes away trace materials and accelerates the decomposition of human remains. In the humid environment of the South, even in the months of February and March, the elements are unforgiving. The victim face had become unrecognizable, making a positive identification impossible at the initial scene. Yet, investigator Maurice already had a name echoing in the back of his mind. He recalled a missing person report filed by a woman named Miss Brittany Green. Miss Green had come to the authorities to report that Leon Harrison Jr., a man everyone affectionately called Junior, had vanished. He was the father of her 2 children, and although they no longer lived together, he was a devoted parent. He made it a point to call every single night to speak with his children. When 2 weeks passed without a single phone call, Brittany knew something was terribly wrong. A man with a family, with children who look up to him, does not simply vanish off the face of the earth without a trace. She described Junior as a 32-year-old African-American male with a very specific identifying mark, a tattoo of a rose on his inner right forearm. For investigator Alan Morris, this was a pivotal moment. While he usually handled property crimes, this would be his very first homicide investigation. If the body was indeed Junior, the weight of that responsibility was immense. The body was transported for an autopsy, an experience that Maurice would never forget. The first autopsy is always a shock to the system, a gruesome reminder of the fragility of life. Seeing a fellow human being bound hand and foot is a sight that challenges one's notions of civilization. It is perhaps the most uncivilized way to leave this world. The medical examiner faced a difficult task. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, a definitive cause of death was hard to pinpoint. There were lacerations on the belly, but they were shallow, not enough to cause someone to bleed to death or to suggest internal organ damage. The river is home to many creatures, including alligators, but these predators generally prefer live targets. The medical examiner could, however, definitively rule the death a homicide based on the bindings alone. There was a suggestion of blunt force trauma, perhaps a beating, but the water had taken so much of the evidence with it. Deoxyribonucleic acid traces and fingerprints were unlikely to survive such an extended period submerged. The one thing the water could not hide, however, was the rose tattoo on the right arm. The missing person case was officially There is a common saying in the world of homicide investigation that you go from being the new guy to the old guy in about 30 minutes. The pressure was on Maurice, and he felt every bit of it. He began by immersing himself in the life of the victim. He spoke again with Miss Brittany Green, who painted a picture of a man who was funny, outgoing, and possessed a big personality. He was a man who loved to smile and tell jokes, but above all, he was a loving father. His children remembered him as joyful and active. His son recalled the pride in his father's eyes during his first football game, watching Junior run down the sidelines, cheering him on toward his first touchdown. He was a man deeply connected to his family. When investigators asked about potential enemies or conflicts, Brittany mentioned an estranged wife named Taish Ra. They had been married since September of 2015, but the relationship had crumbled, and Junior had moved out. He had often spoken to Brittany about his unhappiness in that marriage. This gave the investigators their first real lead. A dead man with recent marital troubles is always a point of interest in a murder investigation. It might be nothing, or it might be everything. Locating Taish Rowe proved to be a challenge at first. While Morris waited for her to surface, he turned his attention to Junior phone records. He discovered that on the evening of February 25th, Junior had received 2 phone calls from a man named Samuel. Pillman appeared to be one of the last people to have contact with Junior while he was still alive. When Morris attempted to contact Pillman at his job, he was gone. He was eventually tracked to a Quality Inn. When Maurice identified himself over the phone, Pillman abruptly hung up. In the mind of a detective, hanging up the phone is an invitation for a face-to-face meeting. It raises an immediate eyebrow. When Maurice finally got Pillman back on the line, he took a more direct approach, explaining that he was investigating the death of Leon Harrison Jr. Pillman finally opened up, explaining that he had called Junior because he wanted to purchase some marijuana to celebrate a birthday with his roommate. Junior had a small side hustle selling grass, a fact that mattered very little to Maurice in the context of a murder. A victim's life choices do not diminish the tragedy of their death. Pillman claimed that Junior agreed to come to the hotel, but he never showed up. The phone records supported this story, as the second call lasted only 15 to 20 seconds, indicating there was no answer. Samuel Pillman was dropped as a suspect. The investigation was already 2 weeks behind, because the body had been in the river for so long, but Maurice was determined to move forward. He finally located Taya Shra at her place of employment, a local steel mill where she worked as a security guard. Junior had also worked there at one time. When told of her husband's death, Taish was brought to the police department for questioning. At first, she painted a picture of a stable marriage, but she eventually admitted to issues with money and infidelity. The couple had even been forced to move in with her father and brother. Taish claimed she had kicked Junior out after discovering his cheating, but they had maintained an on-again, off-again relationship. Taish told investigators that the last time she saw Junior was on February 25th, around 10 o'clock in the evening. She claimed he came by to pick up some clothes and was distracted by his phone. According to Taish, he was arguing with another woman named Rosario. Taish described Rosario as a jealous, maniacal woman who was obsessed with Junior. This created a new person of interest. If Rosario was as volatile as Taish suggested, she might be capable of violence. However, the story took a dramatic turn when Rosario herself walked into the police station. She was a woman who was clearly heartbroken, not a woman filled with murderous rage. She spoke of her deep love for Junior and her confusion over his disappearance. When asked why she had not reported him missing, she explained that she did not want to interfere in his complicated life, thinking perhaps he was just trying to let things settle with his wife. Rosario told a very different story about the marriage, claiming that Taish was the one who was unfaithful, and that the marriage was a source of constant stress for Junior. The most telling piece of evidence came when investigators asked Rosario about the supposed angry phone call on the night of the 25th. Rosario denied ever having a heated argument with Junior. Instead, she claimed that Taish had used Junior's phone to call her, screaming and cussing at her, calling her the other woman. Rosario handed over her phone, and the text, history and call logs confirmed her story. Rosario was not the aggressor. She was a victim of Taish's anger. The jealous rage factor was pointing directly back to the estranged wife. Rosario also provided insight into the family dynamics, mentioning that Taish's brother, Alex Ra Jr., and her father, Alex Ra Sr., both harbored a deep hatred for Junior. They saw him as a bad influence and a source of trouble for Taish. Alex Jr., in particular, acted as his sister's self-appointed bodyguard. Now, the investigators were looking at a family affair. Maurice was buried in a web of lies and finger-pointing, but he had one piece of physical evidence that haunted his thoughts: the speaker wire. A bell went off in the brain of investigator Maurice. he learned that Alex Ra Jr. worked at a garage where he installed car stereo. This meant he worked with speaker wire every single day. When Maurice visited the garage, the manager confirmed that Alex Jr. only worked a few days a week. Although the wire found at the garage did not perfectly match the wire used to bind Jr., the connection was too strong to ignore. The problem was that they had a crime scene of discovery, the river, but they lacked the crime scene, where the murder actually occurred. Logic dictated that something terrible had happened within the Ra household. Armed with circumstantial evidence, Maurice secured a search warrant for the house on High Marcus Street. As the family stood outside, investigators meticulously searched the home. They walked into Taish's bedroom and noticed something peculiar about the wall-to-wall carpeting. There were odd patches where pieces of the carpet had been cut out and replaced at strange angles. It was a desperate attempt to hide something. When they pulled up the carpet and the padding, they found what they were looking for. The subfloor was saturated with a massive stain that tested positive for blood. The scene was chilling. It was not just a small spot, it was a major saturation. There was high-velocity blood spatter on the walls, a telltale sign of blunt force trauma. Something violent and final had happened in that room. Forensic tests later confirmed that the blood belonged to Leon Harrison Jr. When confronted with this evidence, Taish Ra remained cold. She claimed the massive amount of blood was merely a nosebleed. Maurice was not buying it. You would need a fire hose up your nose to produce that much blood. Taish eventually requested a lawyer and was allowed to leave, as the evidence was still deemed insufficient for an immediate arrest. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a man named Andrew Johnson. He came forward to tell police that a few weeks after Jr. went missing, Alex Ra Jr. had asked him for a ride to Myrtle Beach. During that ride, Alex Jr. had allegedly confessed to the crime, even laughing about the business they had taken care of. Global positioning system data from Alex Jr. phone confirmed the trip to Myrtle Beach, exactly when Johnson said it happened. Even more damning was the data from the night of February 26th, the night of the murder. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Alex Jr. phone was located at a local Walmart. Investigators spent hours scouring surveillance footage and eventually found what they were looking for. Alex Ra Jr. and his father, Alex Ra Sr., were on camera purchasing hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide is a well-known agent for cleaning blood. While innocent people do shop at 2 in the morning, they rarely spend that time buying cleaning supplies to scrub a massive bloodstain from a bedroom floor. This was the final nail in the coffin. Everyone was taken into custody. Taish, Alex Jr., and Alex Sr. The investigators reconstructed the horrific events of that night. Taish had lured Jr. to the house with a deceptive text message, promising a romantic candlelight dinner and a bath. Jr., likely hoping for a reconciliation, walked into a trap. Once inside the bedroom, he was ambushed by the family. He was beaten, subdued, and bound with speaker wire, rendered completely helpless. The rage of a failing marriage and family protection had turned into a lethal conspiracy. After the murder, they worked together to clean the scene and transport the body to the Black River, hoping the current would carry their secret all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. But the river gave up its dead, and the truth could no longer be hidden. In court, the jury saw through the lies, while the father was found to be involved only in the cleanup and was sentenced to 8 years for obstruction of justice. Taish and Alex Jr. were convicted of murder. They were both sentenced to 37 years in prison. For Brittany Green and her children, the verdict brought tears of relief. Justice had been served for a father who was taken far too soon. Every year, Jr. family gathers to release balloons at the spot where he was found, keeping his memory alive. This case, the first homicide for investigator Alan Morris, remains a testament to the fact that good police work is the ultimate answer to the human condition. It cannot prevent the darkness of the human heart, but it ensures that those who choose the path of violence will face the consequences of their behavior. That is the true meaning of justice. It was a Saturday morning on March 11th. The air held that specific coastal dampness, where the scent of plowed earth meets the brackish breath of the Atlantic. For one local resident, the morning was intended to be a simple escape, a few hours spent plying the hobby of fishing on the serene waters of the Black River. However, the rhythm of the tide brought more than just the usual catch. As he scanned the surface, he noticed something caught in the gentle currents that did not look right to his seasoned eyes. He moved closer, his heart beginning to syncopate with a growing sense of dread, and then he was incredibly alarmed. What he saw was a body floating in the Black River. In the world of law enforcement, a body in the water is one of the most difficult puzzles to solve. I have spent my career closing murder cases, and I can tell you that it takes a rare breed to solve the to catch a ruthless killer, and to find justice for the dead. That is what it takes to be an American detective. In this jurisdiction, they call them investigators rather than detectives, a title held by men like investigator Alan Morris. Maurice was a general investigator, a man used to the wide spectrum of human folly, from fraud cases and burglaries to bank robberies. He understood better than anyone that a normal day can turn into a busy day really quickly. For Alan Morris, this job was not just a career, it was life. The discovery occurred within the county jurisdiction, prompting an immediate response from the sheriff office. The call reached the investigators at approximately 1:30 that afternoon. When Maurice arrived at the riverbank, the scene was one of grim labor. Law enforcement officers were in the process of bringing the body to shore, physically grasping the individual by his clothing to ease him back onto the land. At that stage, the questions were fundamental. Was this an accident? Had someone fallen from a boat? But as soon as the body was on solid ground, the illusion of an accident evaporated. The victim's wrists and ankles were bound with speaker wire. This was no mishap of nature. It was a clear indication of homicide. When a victim is found in the water, the complexity of the case increases exponentially. Water is a cruel element that does terrible things to human remains. It erases the subtle stories that a body usually tells. In the humid environment of the South, decomposition accelerates, and the face of the victim was already unrecognizable. Positive identification was impossible at the scene. However, Morris had a lead resting in the back of his mind. He recalled a missing person report filed by a woman named Brittany Green. Brittany had reported the disappearance of Leon Harrison Jr., a 32-year-old African-American male whom everyone called JR. He was the father of her 2 children. And though they no longer lived together, he was a man of habit and heart. He called every single night to speak to his children. When those calls stopped for 2 weeks, Brittany knew something was horribly wrong. A man with loved ones and children does not simply vanish off the earth. She provided a crucial detail. JR had a rose tattooed on his inner right forearm. For investigator Maurice, this was a pivotal moment. He generally worked property crimes, and if this was confirmed as a homicide, it would be his very first. The body was transported for an autopsy, an experience that Maurice found nerve-wracking and gruesome. Seeing a human being bound hand and foot is perhaps the most uncivilized way to witness someone leaving this world. The medical examiner confirmed that while the level of decomposition made it difficult to pinpoint a single cause of death, the presence of the bindings made the ruling of homicide undeniable. There were lacerations on the belly, but they were not deep enough to cause The presence of wildlife in the river added to the physical trauma of the remains. Ultimately, the autopsy provided one definitive piece of evidence: the rose tattoo on the right arm. The missing person case was now officially a homicide investigation. Morris began by circling back to the people who knew JR best. Brittany Green spoke of a man who was funny, outgoing, and possessed a big personality. He was a loving father who met his son in the end zone after his first touchdown, cheering with the joy that only a devoted parent can feel. But every life has its complications. When asked about enemies or issues, Brittany pointed toward JR's estranged wife, Taishra. They had married in September of 2015, but had recently separated. JR had not been happy. The search for Taishra proved difficult at first, so Maurice turned his attention to phone records. The digital trail is often more honest than the human one. On the evening of February 25th, JR had received 2 calls from a man named Samuel Pillman. When Maurice attempted to contact Pillman, the man hung up the phone as soon as the investigator identified himself. In the psychology of an investigation, hanging up on a detective is a neon sign of guilt or fear. However, when Maurice called back and explained the gravity of the situation, he admitted he was looking to buy some marijuana from JR to celebrate a birthday. JR had a side hustle selling grass, a fact that Maurice noted but did not judge. To the detective, a victim is a victim, regardless of their lifestyle. The phone records eventually backed up Pillman's story, showing the calls were short and that JR had never answered the second one. Pillman was dropped as a suspect. Finally, Maurice located Taishra at a local steel mill where she worked as a security guard. When the news of her husband's death was broken to her, she was brought to the police department for questioning. She described a marriage that started well but soured over money and infidelity. The couple had moved in with her father and brother, a domestic arrangement that likely added pressure to an already fractured relationship. Taish claimed she kicked JR out after discovering his cheating, yet they maintained an on-again, off-again connection. According to Taish, The last time she saw GR was February 25th, around 10 o'clock in the evening. She claimed he came by to pick up clothes and was on the phone with another woman named Rosario. Taish described a heated argument, painting Rosario as a maniacal, jealous woman. In the mind of a criminal, shifting blame to a jealous rival is a classic defensive maneuver. Maurice needed to find Rosario. Rosario soon came forward on her own. Far from the crazy woman Taish described, Rosario was a heartbroken partner who had loved JR desperately. She provided a mirror image of Taish's story. Rosario claimed it was Taish who was the source of rage and threats. She even handed over her phone, which confirmed her account. There was no angry phone call from Rosario to JR that night. Instead, there were harassing calls from Taish to Rosario. The psychological profile was shifting. The jealous rage did not belong to the girlfriend. It belonged to the wife. Rosario also provided a crucial insight into the family dynamics of the Ray household. She mentioned that Taish's brother, Alex Ra Jr., and her father, Alex Ra Sr., both harbored a deep hatred for JR. The brother saw himself as his sister bodyguard, and they viewed JR as a negative influence. Maurice was now looking at a potential family conspiracy. The only physical evidence from the river was the speaker wire. Maurice, showing the tenacity required of a good investigator, went to every local outlet, including Walmart, to find a match. When those searches failed, he looked into the background of Alex Ra Jr. He discovered that Alex worked at a garage and frequently installed car stereo. He worked with speaker wire. Though the wire at his workplace was not an identical match, the connection was too coincidental to ignore. Lacking a definitive crime scene, Maurice speculated that the murder occurred within the Ra household on High Market Street. He secured a search warrant. When the investigators entered the house, they focused on Taish's bedroom. They noticed something highly unusual. Sections of the wall-to-wall carpeting had been cut out and replaced at odd angles. When they pulled up the replacement pieces in the padding beneath, they found the subfloor saturated with blood. A presumptive test confirmed it was human blood. Further lab tests proved it belonged to Leon Harrison Jr. The investigation had found its crime scene. JR had met his end in that bedroom. The amount of blood and the high-velocity spatter on the walls suggested a violent struggle involving blunt trauma. Maurice brought Taish in again. When shown the photos of the blood-soaked side, she attempted a desperate and mathematically impossible excuse. She claimed it was a nosebleed. Maurice, with a touch of grim irony, noted that one would need a fire hose up their nose to produce that much blood. The case still lacked a direct witness, until a man named Andrew Johnson came forward. He reported that Alex Ra Jr. had asked him for a ride to Myrtle Beach shortly after JR's disappearance. During that ride, Alex had made incriminating statements, laughing about a business they had handled. GPS data from Alex's phone confirmed the trip. More importantly, the digital footprint showed that at 2 o'clock in the morning on February 26, Alex Jr. and Alex Sr. had visited a Walmart. Surveillance footage caught them purchasing hydrogen peroxide, a well-known agent for cleaning blood. The pieces of the puzzle were now locked in place. Taish had lured JR to the house with the promise of a candlelight dinner and a romantic reconciliation. It was a trap. Once he was inside the bedroom, he was ambushed by Taish and her brother. They bound him with speaker wire, beat him until he was deceased, and then, with the help of their father, attempted to erase the evidence. They then transported his body to the Black River, hoping the current would carry their secret to the depths of the ocean. Justice was served in the courtroom, while the jury found that the father was primarily involved in the cleanup, leading to a conviction for obstruction of justice and a sentence of 8 years. Taish and Alex Jr. were convicted of murder. Both were sentenced to 37 years in prison. For investigator Alan Morris, his first homicide case was a baptism by fire that he would never forget. For the family of JR, the verdict brought tears of relief. Although JR was gone, his memory lived on through his children, who continued to release balloons at the river and celebrate the life of a father who was joyful, funny, and deeply loved. In the end, good police work provided the answer to a dark chapter of human behavior. Law enforcement stands as the consequence for those who believe they can escape the reach of justice. The morning of Saturday, March 11th, began with the deceptive tranquility that often characterizes the coastal regions of South Carolina. In the town of Georgetown, where the slow-moving waters of the Black River weave through the landscape like a dark ribbon of history, a local resident set out to enjoy the quiet solitude of fishing. The air was likely cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and brackish water, a typical atmosphere for early March. However, The rhythm of his hobby was shattered when he noticed an anomaly in the current. Something was bobbing in the water, an object that did not belong to the natural debris of the river. As he drew closer, the horrifying reality dawned upon him, transforming a peaceful morning into the start of a harrowing journey toward justice. What he found was a human body floating in the depths of the Black River, a sight that would summon the full weight of the law to these quiet banks. Solving a murder is a task that requires a specific temperament, a blend of clinical detachment and profound empathy. It takes a rare breed of individual to look into the abyss of human cruelty and remain focused on a singular goal of finding the truth for those who can no longer speak. This is the life of an investigator. In Georgetown, that call was answered by investigator Alan Morris. Within the local jurisdiction, the title of investigator is used rather than detective, perhaps reflecting the general nature of their duties. Alan Morris was a man accustomed to the broad spectrum of law enforcement, handling everything from the paperwork of fraud to the tension of bank robberies and the violation of home burglaries. Every day started with the potential for normalcy, but in this profession, the transition from a routine morning to a life-altering investigation can occur in the blink of an eye. For Maurice, this particular call at approximately 1:30 in the afternoon would mark a significant milestone in his career. It was the moment his life as a general investigator shifted toward the intense, focused world of homicide. When the sheriff's office arrived at the scene, the recovery process was already underway. The task of bringing a body to shore is never easy, neither physically nor emotionally. Law enforcement officers had to reach into the dark water, physically grasping the clothing of the deceased to ease him back to the earth. At that initial stage, many questions hung in the air. Was this a tragic accident? Had someone fallen from a boat or slipped into the current? The uncertainty was brief. As soon as the body reached the shore, the grim reality became undeniable. The victim's wrists and ankles were bound with speaker wire, a signature of deliberate, cold-blooded intent. This was not a mishap of nature or a simple drowning. It was a clear and haunting indication of homicide. Water is a cruel environment for a forensic investigation. It acts as an eraser, slowly scrubbing away the vital clues that a perpetrator might leave behind. The elements in the South, even during the months of February and March, can accelerate the process of decomposition, making the task of identification nearly impossible through visual means alone. The face of the individual was unrecognizable, lost to the relentless passage of time and the biological activity of the river. When a victim is discovered in such a state, the traditional methods of finding a cause of death are often frustrated. The body, in its silence, cannot immediately tell the story of its end. Yet, even in this state of decay, the bindings remained, a silent scream of foul play that investigator Maurice could not ignore. As the team worked, Morris began to connect the present horror to a past report. His mind turned to a missing person case that had recently landed on his desk. A woman named Brittany Green had come forward to report the disappearance of Leon Harrison Jr., a man known to everyone as JR. He was the father of her 2 children. And although they no longer lived together, his devotion to his offspring was unwavering. He made it a point to call every single night to speak with his children, a routine that defined his character as a parent. When 2 weeks passed without a single word, the silence became a deafening alarm. Brittany knew that a man with family, loved ones, and children does not simply vanish off the face of the earth without a reason. She described him as a 32-year-old African-American male with a distinct identifier, a rose tattoo on his inner right forearm. This detail would become the bridge between the missing person and the victim in the river. Investigator Maurice was stepping into new territory. While he was experienced in property crimes, this was to be his very first homicide investigation. The weight of the responsibility was immense. He attended the autopsy, an experience that remains etched in the memory of any law enforcement officer. For a veteran of hundreds of such procedures, the shock might fade, but for the first time, it is a visceral confrontation with mortality. The medical examiner confirmed the grim nature of the discovery. While a level of decomposition prevented a definitive statement on the exact cause of death, the presence of the bindings allowed the case to be officially ruled a homicide. There were lacerations on the belly, though they were not deep enough to cause a person to bleed to death or to damage internal organs. The presence of wildlife in the river, including alligators, added a layer of complexity to interpreting the marks on the remains. Ultimately, the autopsy provided the one piece of evidence needed to move forward. The rose tattoo on the right arm confirmed that the body was indeed Leon Harrison Jr. The missing person case was now a murder investigation. In the world of homicide, The learning curve is steep. Morris felt the pressure of being the new guy, but the urgency of the case pushed him forward. He began by diving into the life of the victim. Through conversations with Brittany Green, a picture of JR emerged. He was described as a funny, outgoing man with a big personality, someone who loved to smile and tell jokes. More importantly, he was a loving and caring father. His children remembered him as joyful and active, the kind of dad who would run down the sidelines of a football field, cheering with pure abandon as his son scored a touchdown. This was a man who was deeply connected to his family, making his violent end all the more senseless and tragic. As Morris probed deeper into JR's life, he looked for friction. In any homicide, the closest relationships are often the first place to find a motive. Brittany revealed that JR had an estranged wife named Taish Ra. They had been married since September of 2015, but the relationship had soured. JR had moved out and often spoke of his unhappiness. This marital trouble provided a potential starting point for the investigation. However, locating Taish Ra proved to be a challenge, prompting Maurice to turn his attention to other leads in the meantime, specifically the victim's phone records. The digital footprints left behind by JR in the final hours of his known life led to a man named Samuel Pillman. On the evening of February 25th, JR had received 2 phone calls from Pillman. When Maurice attempted to contact him, Pillman's behavior was immediately suspicious. He hung up the phone as soon as the investigator identified himself. In the logic of an investigation, hanging up on a detective is an invitation for a face-to-face meeting. Maurice persisted, and when they finally spoke, he took a softer approach to draw out the truth. Pillman admitted that he had reached out to JR to purchase marijuana for a birthday celebration. He claimed that during the first call, JR agreed to meet at a hotel room, but he never arrived. A second call went unanswered. The phone records corroborated Pillman's story, showing a brief second call of only 15 to 20 seconds, consistent with an unanswered attempt. With this verification, Samuel Pillman was dropped as a suspect. The investigation was already 2 weeks behind because of the time the body spent in the river. Maurice knew he had to be meticulous. He finally tracked down Taish Ra at her place of employment, a steel mill where she worked as a security guard. It was a place JR had also worked. When the investigators broke the news of her husband's death, they brought her to the station for a formal interview. Initially, Taish painted a picture of a decent marriage that eventually crumbled due to financial stress and infidelity. The couple had even moved in with her father and brother to manage their expenses. She claimed that JR had cheated on her, leading her to kick him out, though they maintained an on-again, off-again dynamic. During the interview, Taish provided a specific detail about the last time she saw JR. It was the night of February 25th, around 10 o'clock. She claimed he came by to pick up clothes and was distracted by his phone. She alleged that he was having a heated argument with another woman named Rosario. Taish described Rosario as a jealous, unstable individual who was capable of anything. This redirection of suspicion toward a supposed crazy girlfriend is a common tactic, but an investigator must verify every claim. When Rosario heard that the police were looking for her, she came forward voluntarily. Her account of the relationship was vastly different. She spoke of her love for JR and her grief over his death. When asked why she had not reported him missing, she explained that she did not want to interfere in his complicated life, assuming he might be avoiding drama with his wife. When the investigators asked about the alleged angry phone call on the night of the 25th, Rosario's story took a sharp turn. She denied ever having an angry conversation with JR instead. She claimed that Taish was the one who had called her from JR's phone, ranting, raving, and screaming threats. Rosario handed over her phone, and the text history and call logs perfectly matched her version of events. The person fueled by jealous rage was not the girlfriend, but the estranged wife. The focus shifted back to the Ra family. Rosario had mentioned that JR did not get along with Taish's brother, Alex Ra Jr., or her father, Alex Ra Sr. They've reportedly viewed JR as a negative influence and a source of trouble for Taish. Alex Jr., in particular, saw himself as his sister's protector. With Rosario cleared, Maurice found himself staring at a complex web of family loyalty and resentment. He knew that the key to the case likely lay in the physical evidence, specifically the speaker wire used to bind the victim. A search for the source of the wire led Maurice to the local Walmart, but no recent purchases matched the specific type found on JR. However, a breakthrough occurred when Maurice learned that Alex Ra Jr. worked at a garage where he installed cars. This meant he had regular access to and expertise with speaker wire. Although a direct match could not be made with the wire currently at the shop, The circumstantial link was becoming stronger. The investigators decided it was time to move on the Rajos. They obtained a search warrant for the home on High Marcus Street. As Taish, her father, and her brother waited outside, the forensic team began a meticulous sweep of the interior. They were looking for any sign of a struggle, for the missing speaker wire, or for traces of blood. In Tasha's bedroom, they noticed something unusual about the wall-to-wall carpeting. Small sections had been cut out and replaced at odd angles. When they pulled up the carpet and the padding beneath, they discovered a horrifying sight. The subfloor was saturated with a massive amount of blood. The discovery of the blood changed everything. It was not just a small stain. It was a significant volume that indicated a life-threatening injury. Forensic testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Leon Harrison Jr. It was now clear that JR had met his end in that very room. There was also evidence of high-velocity blood spatter on the walls, the kind of pattern produced by blunt force trauma. Someone had been brutally beaten in that space. Taish was brought in for another interview. When confronted with photos of the blood-soaked subfloor, she attempted to dismiss it as a nosebleed. Maurice challenged this absurd claim, noting that no human being could produce that much blood from a simple nosebleed. Despite the evidence, Taish maintained her innocence, claiming she would never hurt her husband. She eventually invoked her right to an attorney and was allowed to leave, as the investigators still needed more to secure an arrest. They knew what had happened, but proving it to a jury required a complete narrative. The final pieces of the puzzle fell into place when a witness named Andrew Johnson came forward. He reported that shortly after JR went missing, Alex Ra Jr. had asked for a ride to Myrtle Beach. During the trip, Alex Jr. had allegedly bragged about his involvement in something serious, laughing about doing business. Phone records and GPS data confirmed that this trip took place exactly as Johnson described. Furthermore, the GPS data revealed that at 2 o'clock in the morning on February 20, the night of the murder, Alex Ra Jr.'s phone was at a local Walmart. Surveillance footage from that Walmart provided the ultimate evidence. It showed Alex Ra Jr. and his father, Alex Ra Sr., purchasing hydrogen peroxide in the middle of the night. Hydrogen peroxide is a well-known cleaning agent for removing blood. The image of the father and son buying cleaning supplies just hours after JR vanished was the final nail in the coffin. It proved that the entire family was involved in the crime and the subsequent cover-up. The investigators reconstructed the final moments of JR's life. Taish had lured him to the house with the promise of a romantic reconciliation, sending text messages about a candlelight dinner and a bath. JR, perhaps hoping to fix his broken marriage, walked into a trap. Once inside the bedroom, he was ambushed by Taish and her brother. They overwhelmed him, bound him with speaker wire, and beat him until he was no longer a threat to their family's peace. Together, they disposed of his body in the Black River, hoping the current would carry their secret into the vastness of the Atlantic Ocean. In the end, justice was served. A jury found that while the father was not a primary participant in the murder, he was guilty of obstruction of justice for his role in the cleanup. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Taish Ra and Alex Ra Jr. were convicted of murder and each received a sentence of 37 years. For the family of JR, the verdict brought a sense of closure, though the void left by his absence could never be fully filled. His children grew up without their father's physical presence, but they kept his memory alive by visiting the river where he was found and releasing balloons on his birthday. This case serves as a profound reminder of the complexities of the human heart and the lengths to which some will go to protect a twisted sense of family honor. It also stands as a testament to the dedication of investigators like Alan Moore, who refused to let a case go cold, even when the elements and the perpetrators work against them. The story of Leon Harrison Jr. is one of tragedy, but it is also one of the enduring power of the truth. Good police work cannot prevent every crime, but it ensures that those who choose the path of violence will face the consequences of their actions. In the quiet town of Georgetown, the Black River continues to flow, but it no longer holds the dark secret of a family's betrayal. Justice, like the river itself, eventually finds its way to the sea. It was a Saturday morning, March 11, 2017, in the quiet town of Georgetown, South Carolina. The sun had begun its ascent over the landscape, casting long and flickering shadows across the surface of the Black River. A local resident, seeking the solace of his hobby, was out on the water for a morning of fishing. The river was usually a place of peace, a sanctuary where the only sounds were the gentle lapping of the water and the occasional call of a bird. However, on this particular morning, the fisherman noticed something floating in the current that did not belong. At first, it appeared to be a piece of debris, perhaps a log or a discarded sack. But as his boat drifted closer, the reality of the situation became chillingly clear. He looked more closely and was incredibly alarmed to find that it was a human body, bloated and bobbing in the dark waters of the Black River. This was the beginning of a journey into the darkest reaches of the human heart. Solving a murder takes a rare breed of individual, someone willing to look at the things most people turn away from. Someone dedicated to catching a ruthless killer and finding justice for those who can no longer speak for themselves. This is what it means to be an American detective. Investigator Alan Morris was the man who answered this particular call. In this part of the country, they are often called investigators rather than detectives, perhaps because they are generalists who handle everything from fraud and burglaries to bank robberies. Maurice was used to the variety of the job, knowing that a normal day could turn into a busy and high-stakes day in an instant. For him, the job was life itself. The call came in at approximately 1:30 that afternoon. The body had been discovered within the county jurisdiction, requiring the sheriff office to respond immediately. When Investigator Morris arrived at the scene, law enforcement officers were already in the process of bringing the remains to the shore. They had to physically reach into the water, grabbing hold of the individual by his clothing to ease him back onto the land. In those initial moments, 1,000 questions raced through the minds of the officers. Was this a tragic accident? Had someone fallen out of a boat or slipped into the water while walking along the bank? The truth was revealed the moment the body reached the mud of the riverbank. It was immediately evident to Maurice that this was no accident. The victim's wrists and ankles were tightly bound with speaker wire. To an investigator, this was a clear and unmistakable signature of a homicide. Finding a victim in the water enormously complicates a case. The elements do terrible things to the human form, and in a southern climate, decomposition happens with alarming speed, even in the cooler months of February and March. The water, the temperature, and the local wildlife all play a factor. In this case, the face of the man was completely unrecognizable. Positive identification was impossible at the scene. However, Maurice had a lead in the back of his mind. He recalled a missing person report filed recently by a woman named Brittany Green. She had come to the office to report that the father of her 2 children, a man named Leon Harrison Jr., known to everyone as JR, had vanished. According to Brittany, Leon was a 32-year-old African-American male. He was a man with deep roots in his family, someone who routinely called his children every single night to check on them. When those calls stopped for 2 weeks, Brittany knew in her heart that something was wrong. People with loved ones and children do not simply vanish off the earth without a reason. She provided a crucial detail that would eventually bridge the gap between the missing person and the body in the river. Leon had a distinct tattoo of a rose on his inner right forearm. For investigator Alan Morris, this case represented a significant milestone. While he was experienced in property crimes, this would be his very first homicide investigation. The weight of the responsibility was palpable as the body was sent for an autopsy. For a new investigator, the first autopsy is a nerve-wracking and gruesome experience, a stark reminder of the lack of civilization in the way some people are forced out of this world. The medical examiner explained that because of the advanced state of decomposition, a specific cause of death was difficult to determine. There were lacerations on the belly, but they were not deep enough to cause a person to bleed to death, and there was no internal damage from those marks. The river was home to alligators, but they generally prefer live targets. The examiner suggested that blunt force trauma from a beating might have been involved, but he could not say for certain. In a water recovery case, traditional evidence like DNA or fingerprints rarely survives. The water washes away the traces that might otherwise lead directly to a suspect. However, the autopsy did provide one vital piece of information. The rose tattoo on the right arm was still visible. This confirmed that the man in the river was indeed Leon Harrison Jr. The case was no longer a search for a missing person. It was now a hunt for a killer. Maurice began his investigation by immersing himself in the life of the victim. He spoke again with Brittany Green, who described Leon as a funny, outgoing man with a big personality. He was a loving and joyful father who was active in the lives of his children. His son remembered him as his biggest fan, someone who would run down the sidelines cheering during football games. But beneath the surface of this seemingly happy life, there were complications. Brittany revealed that Leon had an estranged wife named Taya Shrew. They had been married since September of 2015, but the relationship had soured. Leon had moved out because he was unhappy, and they had been dealing with recent marital troubles. In the world of homicide, recent marital trouble is always a point of interest for investigators. Maurice set out to find Tashrew, but locating her proved to be difficult at first. While waiting for a lead on her whereabouts, he turned his attention to Leon phone records. He found that on the evening of February 25th, Leon had received 2 calls from a man named Samuel Pillman. Thinking Pillman might be the last person to see Leon alive, Maurice went to his workplace, only to find he was not there. He tracked him to a local hotel. The quality in... When Maurice knocked on the door, there was no answer. When he called Pillman's cell phone and identified himself as a detective, Pillman abruptly hung up. In the mind of an investigator, hanging up on the police is a quick way to become a primary suspect. Maurice called back, changing his approach. He explained he was investigating the death of Leon Harrison Jr. and simply wanted to know why Pillman had been calling him. Pillman eventually admitted that he and his roommate wanted to celebrate a birthday and had contacted Leon to buy some marijuana. Leon had a small side hustle selling grass, and Pillman had arranged for him to come to the hotel room. However, Leon never showed up. When Pillman called a second time, there was no answer. Maurice analyzed the phone data and found that the second call only lasted 15 to 20 seconds, which matched Pillman's story. With his alibi confirmed by the records, Pillman was dropped as a suspect. The investigation was now 2 weeks behind because of the time Leon had been missing. Maurice knew he had to keep moving. He finally located Tahish Rue at her job, where she worked as a security guard at a local steel mill. Leon had also worked there at one time. When Maurice and his team broke the news of Leon's death to her, they invited her to the police department for a formal interview. At first, Tahish painted a picture of a marriage that started well but became strained by money problems. They had been forced to move in with her father and her brother. She also mentioned that both she and Leon had issues with infidelity. Tahish claimed she had kicked Leon out after discovering he was cheating, but they had maintained an on-again, off-again relationship. She stated that the last time she saw him was around 10 o'clock on the evening of February 25th when he came by to pick up some clothes. According to her, while he was there, he was on the phone with another woman named Rosario. Tahish described a heated argument, claiming Rosario was a maniacal and jealous woman. This shifted the focus of the investigation toward a potential crime of passion involving a jealous girlfriend. However, the story took a turn when Rosario herself walked into the police station. She told a very different tale. She spoke of her deep love for Leon and her devastation at his death. When asked why she had not reported him missing, she explained that she did not want to interfere in his complicated domestic situation, thinking he might just be taking some time away to let things cool down with his wife. Rosario claimed that it was Tahish who was the source of the infidelity and the rage. She provided her phone to the investigators, and her text history and call logs told a story that contradicted Tahish's version of events. There were no angry calls from Rosario to Leon. Instead, there was a record of Tahish calling Rosario, screaming and cussing at her, threatening her for being the other woman. The psychological profile was shifting. Rosario appeared to be a heartbroken woman, while Tahish was emerging as the one with the motive of jealous rage. Rosario also provided another piece of the puzzle. She mentioned that Tahish's brother, Alex Rude Jr., and her father, Alex Rude Sr., both had a deep animosity toward Leon. The brother saw himself as his sister's bodyguard and viewed Leon as a bad influence. The father simply hated the man. Maurice was now looking at a potential family conspiracy. He realized that the only physical evidence he had was the speaker wire used to bind Leon. He began a canvass of local stores, including Walmart, to see if anyone had purchased that specific type of wire recently. The search of the stores turned up nothing, but then a bell went off in Morris' mind. He remembered that Alex Rude Jr. worked at a garage where he installed car stereo. This was a job that required the frequent use of speaker wire. Morris went to the garage, but Alex Jr. was not there. The manager confirmed that Alex worked there a few days a week doing audio installations. Morris examined the wire used at the shop, but it did not match the wire found on the victim. Despite this setback, Maurice was convinced that something had happened at the Rue household on High Market Street. He developed enough circumstantial evidence to obtain a search warrant for the home. When the investigators entered the house, they found Tahish, her brother, and her father. They were asked to wait outside while the team conducted a thorough search. They were looking for cutting tools, speaker wire, and any traces of DNA. When they walked into Tahish's bedroom, they noticed something odd about the carpet. There were missing pieces, and some sections had been replaced at strange angles. It was a suspicious and poorly executed attempt at a repair. When they pulled up the new carpet and the padding underneath, they found a massive stain on the side. A presumptive test confirmed it was blood. The amount of blood was staggering. It was not just a small spot. It was a saturation that had soaked through the carpet and the padding into the wood below. There was also high-velocity blood spatter on the walls, the kind of pattern that results from blunt force trauma or a severe beating. Forensic tests later confirmed that the blood belonged to Leon Harrison Jr. The investigators now knew where the murder had taken place. Leon had met his end in that bedroom. However, a mountain of blood and a suspicious carpet were not enough to make an arrest for murder. They needed to prove who was responsible. Maurice brought Taish in for another interview and showed her the pictures of the blood-soaked sub. Her excuse was that it was merely a nosebleed. Maurice pointed out that a person would need a fire hose up their nose to produce that much blood. Taish continued to deny any involvement, claiming she loved her husband and would never hurt him. When she requested a lawyer, the interview ended, and she was allowed to leave. The investigation seemed to be at a standstill until a witness named Andrew Johnson came forward. He told the police that shortly after Leon went missing, Alex Rue Jr. had asked him to help move some furniture to Myrtle Beach. During that trip, Alex Jr. had allegedly made incriminating comments, laughing about how they had done business. To verify this story, the investigators analyzed the GPS data from Alex Jr.'s cell phone. The records confirmed the trip to Myrtle Beach exactly when the witness said it happened. Even more importantly, the GPS data revealed that at 2 o'clock in the morning on February 20, the night of the murder, Alex Jr. had gone to a local Walmart. The investigators spent hours reviewing surveillance footage from the store. They finally found what they were looking for. Alex Rue Jr. and his father, Alex Rue Sr., were on camera together. They were not buying groceries or household goods. They were buying large quantities of hydrogen peroxide, a well-known cleaning agent used to remove bloodstains. This was the final piece of the puzzle. The family had worked together to clean up the crime scene in the middle of the night. With this evidence, warrants were issued for the arrest of Taish Rue, Alex Rue Jr., and Alex Rue Sr. The theory of the crime became clear. Taish had lured Leon to the house with the promise of a candlelight dinner and a reconciliation. When he entered the bedroom, he was ambushed by Taish and her brother. They overpowered him, bound him with speaker wire, and beat him to death in a fit of rage. Afterward, the father assisted with the cleanup and the disposal of the body. They took Leon to the Black River and threw him in, hoping he would drift out to the Atlantic Ocean and disappear forever. In the court of law, justice was served. The jury found that the father was primarily involved in the cleanup and charged him with obstruction of justice. However, Taish and her brother, Alex Jr., were convicted of murder. The judge sentenced the siblings to 37 years in prison each, while the father received a sentence of 8 years. The conclusion of the case brought a sense of relief and justice to Leon's family. Brittany Green and her children continued to honor his memory, releasing balloons at the river and celebrating his birthday each year. For investigator Alan Morris, his first homicide case was a success. A testament to the power of following the evidence and the importance of holding those who commit such uncivilized acts accountable. The family that kills together stays together, but in this case, they would be staying together behind the bars of a prison cell. Good police work remains the ultimate answer to the flaws of the human condition, ensuring that those who choose violence will eventually face the consequences of their behavior. It was a Saturday morning on March 11th. The air held the early scent of spring, and the Black River flowed with its usual deceptive. A local resident was enjoying his hobby of fishing, a peaceful pastime that was about to be shattered by a grim discovery. As he looked out across the water, he noticed something that did not belong. It was an object bobbing in the current, something that looked tragically human. He looked more closely and felt a wave of alarm wash over him. This was not debris or a fallen log. This was a body floating in the Black River. In the world of law enforcement, it takes a rare breed of individual to answer the call of the dead. These are the people who spend their careers closing murder cases, working to solve the unsolvable and catch ruthless killers, who believe they have escaped the reach of the law. This is the essence of being an investigator. In Georgetown, they call them investigators rather than detectives. But the mission remains the same. Investigator Alan Morris was one such man. He was a general investigator, a role that required him to work everything from fraud and burglaries to bank robberies. He understood that while a day might start as a normal one, it could turn into a busy and life-changing day very quickly. For those in this profession, the job is not just a career, it is life itself. The call came in at about 1:30 that afternoon. Because the body was discovered within the county jurisdiction, the sheriff's office responded immediately. When investigator Morris arrived at the scene, the recovery process was already underway. Officers had to physically reach into the water, grabbing hold of the individual by their clothing to ease the body back to the shore. At first, there was the lingering question of whether this was an accident. Perhaps someone had fallen from a boat or slipped into the dark waters. However, as soon as the body reached the shore, the truth became painfully evident. The victim had his wrists and his ankles bound with speaker wire. This was no accident. It was a clear and chilling indication of a homicide. Finding a victim in the water enormously complicates any investigation. Water is a harsh element that does terrible things to human remains. It accelerates decomposition and can wash away the very evidence needed to find a killer. In the humid environment of the South, even in the months of February and March, the elements play a significant factor in how quickly a body breaks down. In this case, the face was unrecognizable, making positive identification impossible at that early stage. However, investigator Maurice had a lead tucked away in his mind. The department had already been looking into a missing person case. A woman named Brittany Green had reported the father of her 2 children missing. His name was Leon Harrison Jr., though everyone called him Junior. He was 32 years old and had been gone for 2 weeks. Brittany explained that while they no longer lived together, Leon was a dedicated father who called every single night to speak to his children. When those calls stopped, she knew something was deeply wrong. A man with a family and loved ones does not simply vanish off the earth without a reason. Brittany provided a crucial detail for identification. Leon had a rose tattooed on his inner right forearm. Now, Maurice had to face a grim task. For an investigator who generally handled property crimes, this was a significant turning point. If this was indeed a homicide, it would be his very first. The body was sent for an autopsy, a process that can be nerve-wracking for anyone, especially the first time. Seeing a human being bound hand and foot is a shock to the system. It is an uncivilized way for any person to leave this world. The medical examiner confirmed the grim reality. While the level of decomposition was too great to determine a specific cause of death, the bindings alone allowed the examiner to rule it as a homicide. There were lacerations on the belly, but they were not deep enough to cause a person to bleed to death. The examiner suggested that blunt force trauma from a beating might have been involved, but the condition of the remains made it difficult to be certain. In the water, animals and the environment leave their mark, further obscuring the truth. In this river, even the alligators prefer living targets, leaving the dead to the slower processes of nature. In a case like this, traditional forensic evidence, like DNA or fingerprints, rarely survives the water. The investigation would have to rely on old-fashioned police work. The one major exception from the autopsy was the confirmation of the rose tattoo. The body was indeed Leon Harrison Jr. The missing person case was now officially a homicide investigation. Investigator Maurice began the difficult process of retracing the victim's life. He spoke again with Brittany Green, who painted a picture of a man with a big personality. Leon was funny, outgoing, and loved to smile. He was a joyful father who would run down the sidelines of a football field, cheering for his son's first touchdown. This was a man who was deeply connected to his children. When asked about potential enemies, Brittany mentioned that Leon had an estranged wife named Taisha. They had been married for a while but had recently broken up, and Leon had moved out because he was unhappy. This information provided a starting point. A man with recent marital troubles is always a point of interest in a homicide investigation. However, finding Taisha proved to be difficult at first. While searching for her, Maurice turned his attention to Leon's phone records. He discovered that on the evening of February 25th, Leon had received 2 phone calls from a man named Samuel. This man was potentially the last person to see Leon alive. When Maurice attempted to reach Pillman at his job, he found the man was not there. He tracked him to a local hotel, but Pillman would not answer the door. When Maurice finally got him on the cell phone and identified himself as a detective, Pillman hung up. This immediate evasion raised eyebrows. In the mind of an investigator, hanging up on the police is a quick way to become a primary suspect. However, when Maurice called back and explained he was investigating the death of Leon Harrison Jr., Pillman's tone changed. Pillman admitted that he had called Leon to buy some drugs. Leon had a side hustle selling a small amount of grass now and then. To investigator Maurice, the victim's involvement with drugs did not change the value of his life. He was a human being who had been murdered, and that was all that mattered. Pillman explained that Leon was supposed to come to his room to make the deal, but he never showed up. The second call Pillman made only lasted 15 or 20 seconds because there was no answer. The phone records verified this story, and Samuel Pillman was dropped as a suspect. The investigation was already 2 weeks behind because of the time Leon had been missing. Maurice knew he had to keep moving. He finally located Taisha at a steel mill, where she worked as a security guard. It was the same place where Leon had also worked. When the investigators broke the news of her husband's death, she agreed to come to the police department for an interview. At first, Taish described their marriage as being good, but then she admitted to problems. Money was a constant issue, and they had been forced to move in with her father and her brother. She also mentioned that both she and Leon had issues with infidelity. She claimed she had kicked him out after discovering he was cheating, but they had maintained an on-again and off-again relationship. She told Maurice that the last time she saw Leon was on February 25th, at around 10 o'clock in the evening. He had come by to pick up some clothes and was on the phone with another woman named Rosario. Taish described Rosario as a crazy and jealous woman, suggesting she might be capable of something terrible. This led the investigators to Rosario. However, the story Rosario told was the complete opposite of what Taish had claimed. Rosario spoke of her deep love for Leon and her heartbreak over his death. She explained that she had not reported him missing because she did not want to interfere with his life or his family situation, thinking he might just be trying to let things die down with his wife. When asked about the angry phone call Taish had described, Rosario told a different tale. She said she had never had an angry call with Leon. Instead, she had received a call from Taish, who used Leon's phone to scream at her and threaten her. Rosario handed over her phone to the detectives, and her text history and call logs confirmed her version of events. She was not a killer. She was a woman in love. The investigation now shifted back to Taish. It became clear that Taish was the one with the jealous rage, not Rosario. As the detectives dug deeper, they learned about Tishi's family. Her brother, Alex Ra Jr., and her father, Alex Ra Sr., both reportedly had a strong dislike for Leon. The brother saw himself as his sister's bodyguard, and the father viewed Leon as a bad influence. Investigator Maurice was now dealing with a complicated web of family ties and potential lies. He looked back at the only physical evidence he had, the speaker wire used to bind the victim. He searched local stores like Walmart to see if he could find a match for that specific wire, but he found nothing. Then, a bell went off in his brain. Alex Ra Jr. worked at a garage where he installed radios in cars. This was a job that required the constant use of speaker wire. Morris visited the garage, but the wire used there did not match the wire found on Leon. It seemed the wire could have come from anywhere. However, the suspicion remained that something terrible had happened inside the Ray household. The investigators developed enough probable cause to obtain a search warrant for the house on High Market Street. When they entered the home, they found the family seated together. The search was thorough. They looked for cutting objects, wire, and any traces of DNA. When they reached the bedroom belonging to Taish, they noticed something odd about the wall-to-wall carpeting. Pieces of the carpet had been cut out and replaced at strange angles. When they pulled up the carpet padding, they found a massive stain on the sub. A presumptive test confirmed it was blood. There was an enormous amount of blood, so much that it had soaked through the padding and into the wood beneath. It was clear that someone had made a desperate attempt to clean the scene. Forensic analysis also revealed high-velocity blood spatter on the walls, a sign of a violent struggle or a beating. The blood was tested and confirmed to be that of Leon Harrison Jr. Leon had met his end in that bedroom. When Taish was brought back for questioning, she was shown the photographs of the blood-saturated. Her response was to claim it was merely a nosebleed. The investigators knew better. No nosebleed produces that much blood. It was the result of a life-threatening injury. Despite the evidence, Taish maintained her innocence, claiming she would never hurt her husband. When she requested a lawyer, she was allowed to leave, as the investigators still needed more to secure an arrest. The breakthrough came when a man named Andrew Johnson came forward. He told the police that shortly after Leon went missing, Alex Ra Jr. had asked him to help a friend move furniture in Myrtle Beach. The investigators checked the GPS data from Alex Jr.'s cell phone, and it confirmed the trip. More importantly, the digital footprint showed that at 2 o'clock in the morning on February 26th, Alex Jr. had gone to a local Walmart. The investigators spent hours reviewing surveillance footage from the store. They finally found what they were looking for. On the camera, they saw Alex Ra Jr. and his father, Alex Ra Sr., purchasing hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide is a well-known cleaning agent used to remove blood. Seeing the father and son together at 2 in the morning buying cleaning supplies was the final piece of the puzzle. It was the ultimate nail in the coffin for the Rare family. The story of what happened on that night in February finally became clear. Taish and Leon had a failing marriage fueled by jealousy and betrayal. Taish had plotted her revenge, luring Leon to the house with a deceptive text message about a candlelight dinner and a bath. Leon, perhaps hoping for a reconciliation, walked into a trap. Once he was inside the bedroom, he was ambushed. He was attacked, subdued, and bound with speaker wire by Tish and her brother. The beating that followed was driven by pure rage. After Leon died, the family worked together to hide the crime. They cleaned the blood, replaced the carpet, and transported his body to the Black River. They threw him into the water, hoping the current would carry him to the Atlantic Ocean where he would never be found. But the river gave up its secret, and the dedication of a first-time homicide investigator ensured that the truth came to light. In court, the evidence spoke for itself. The jury determined that the father was involved in the cleanup and charged him with obstruction of justice. Tish Ra and her brother, Alex Ra Jr., were convicted of murder. The judge sentenced the siblings to 37 years in prison each, and the father received a sentence of 8 years. For Brittany Green and her children, the verdict brought a sense of justice, though the pain of their loss remained. Leon was a hands-on father who would never get to see his children through their teenage years. Yet, his son still feels his presence on the football field, imagining his father cheering him on from the sidelines. For investigator Alan Morris, this first homicide case would always stay in his mind. It was a testament to the fact that good police work is the answer to the darker parts of the human condition. Law enforcement cannot prevent every tragedy, but it can ensure that there are consequences for those who choose to commit such acts. Justice was served for Leon Harrison Jr., proving that even when a body is cast into the depths of a river, the light of the truth can still find its way to the surface.